Hello everyone, let's talk a little bit about sovereignty. Now, this is one of those tricky concepts that it really helps if you get it right from the very start. So we're going to tee this off by nailing down a few definitions. Now, you should remember some definitions from what we've talked about so far, power particularly, power being the ability to affect change. So if you can affect political change, then you've got political power. Authority is, of course, the right to exercise that power. So if you're going around and exercising that power without authority, you're a bully. If you've got authority but no power, then you're Ed Miliband. And that's a joke that's going to get really old really quickly, perhaps obsolete already. Anyway, the point is that here we have power and we have authority, and knowing what these are is going to get you into a good place to discuss sovereignty. Now, sovereignty is very simple. It is the highest level of authority in any given system. If we have a hive of bees, then the sovereign authority is evidently the queen bee. If we're looking at the classroom, the sovereign authority is the teacher. We're playing the school game, we're playing the teacher-pupil game. I am the teacher, I have the authority in that classroom. Hopefully I've got some power as well. In the school, it's probably the Board of Governors. The headmaster is answerable to the Board of Governors. So you keep looking up the chain, and when you get to somewhere who can't actually look up, then you've probably hit the sovereign authority. Now, in the UK, this is all very complicated because we have a sovereign in the shape of a monarch who doesn't really seem to have any power at all and doesn't really seem to have any authority either. I mean, why the hell is she there? She's German, for God's sake. But, we move on from that. We think, okay, that's not really going to help us. So let's look at sovereignty in a slightly different way. And the way in which we look at it when we've moved away from a street situation, we're in the classroom situation, we say we've got three different types of sovereignty in the UK. We've got political sovereignty, who's at the top of the political tree. We've got legal sovereignty, and we've got policy sovereignty. Now, if you can get your head around these three particular concepts, you will have nothing to worry about in terms of sovereignty. So let's start off with sovereignty, political style. Who is the political sovereign in the UK? What point do people stop looking above them to find out who's above them in the political chain of command? Well, it's not the Queen. Let's just get rid of that right now. I know she's the monarch and we call her the sovereign, but no. When it comes to political sovereignty, that does not reside with the Queen. She's there by accident of birth, and that's no good way to run a political system. It's obviously not God. We don't live in a theocracy. Our leaders do not look to God to justify their position, or indeed the sun, or the volcano, or indeed the moon and the stars. No. Where does all political power come from in the United Kingdom, without which there would be no political authority, no political power at all? It's us. It is the people. And it doesn't matter whether you vote or not, you are still the political sovereign. All political power in the United Kingdom flows from the people to other institutions. And so we say that in the UK, political sovereignty even resides with us. And that means we're a democracy, because a democracy is a system of government predicated, that means based upon popular sovereignty. That is, the people, not God, not the sun, the moon and the stars, not the giant volcano. This is where all political power comes from. It is the people. And if people represent the political sovereigns, if all political authority flows from the people, then you are looking at a democracy. So, in the UK, the people are the political sovereigns. Okay, Mr. Floyd, you say. In which case, what are the legal sovereign? Who is the top of the legal tree? Who doesn't look up when we're looking at legal chain of command? Well, it's not the cops. It's not the Rozzers. Their job is simply to implement the law. If the law changes, they have to respond to that. They can't get to decide who makes the law. And by the same token, it's not actually the courts. What they're doing is they're taking law from somewhere else and deciding whether or not someone has broken it and what should be done thereafter. So, whose law is it that the courts uphold and that the police implement? Well, the short answer is it is it's not government. Ooh, not sure where that one crept in. The government might want to create law, but it doesn't have that authority. All legal authority flows in this case from Parliament. And so we say that Parliament is the legal sovereign. The legal sovereignty of Parliament is a key tenet of our Constitution. And conveniently for you, that is tied up in three particular ideas. First of all, we've got the idea that Parliament and only Parliament can make statute law. Now, there are various different categories of law in the United Kingdom. We've got statute law, we've got common law, we've even got EU law. But as far as you're concerned, statute law is the highest form of law in the land, and only Parliament can make it. Not government, not the courts, not the police. Only Parliament can make statute law, and statute law trumps everything else. Once that law has been made, only Parliament gets to muck around with it. So the courts can't change it, the government can't change it. Only Parliament can change or abolish statute law. Now this is interesting because in the United States, if the Supreme Court looks at something coming out of Congress and they decide they don't like it, they can take out their big red pen and draw a line through it, and bang, that law is excised from the statute books. However, in the UK, only Parliament can change statute law, and we'll be looking at lots of examples of what that means in practice over the rest of the course. Finally, no Parliament can make a statute law that a future Parliament cannot change. We describe that as saying no Parliament can bind a future Parliament. You can't pass a law and say, oh, and this can only be reversed on a Tuesday, or this can only be reversed on a 2/3 majority, or this can only be reversed if there's an R in the month and it's particularly nice weather. Or even worse yet, no Parliament can amend this law. You can't do that. Anything that Parliament giveth, Parliament can taketh away. Parliament cannot bind a future Parliament. Now you need to know those three tenets of sovereignty of Parliament. It's a thing that comes up. It's an exam skill. You need to know it. Okay, so the people are the political sovereigns. Hopefully you're happy with that. The Parliament is the people are the political sovereigns. Hopefully you're happy with that. The Parliament is the legal sovereign, but that probably doesn't sound about right. Who is actually in charge? You must really want to know who is in charge. Who is it who's making the decisions that shape and direct the British political scene? Well, let's call that policy sovereignty. And if we define policy as agenda, the national agenda, then the question then becomes, how policy is what you intend to do and how you intend to do it. So who is in charge of this? It's not Parliament. It's not the people. In fact, the important policy decisions nowadays are made in government. And so we can say that the government has policy sovereignty. The government is the one who decides where the country is going to go, how we're going to do it, and we take that policy, we give that Parliament, and Parliament takes the policy, and if it decides it's appropriate, it will then turn policy/bills into legislation or into law. So the government has policy sovereignty. It decides what the national agenda is, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. It then takes that policy, writes it up as a bill, gives that bill to Parliament. Parliament looks at the bill, decides whether or not it thinks it's appropriate, might change it, might actually decide not to pass it, and then if it sees fit, it will take the bill, turn that into law, and so we move on. This is how laws are made. At a very, very basic level, we'll look at it in much more detail later, but that's how laws are made. The government itself cannot create law, and that is so important. Just get that into your head right now. Gets very, very upset. Examiners get very upset if you start talking about the government creating law. The government proposes bills to Parliament. Parliament takes those bills and turns them into law. Nobody else can do that. You should know that from the previous slide. The question then becomes, to what extent has the national government in the UK surrendered its sovereignty? This is something that comes up sure as night follows day. Now, we already know that the only type of policy that the government has is policy sovereignty. Parliament is still making legislation. The people are still political sovereigns. Nothing changed there. So to what extent then is the national agenda dictated by some other entity? Well, we can look at that in two particular ways. Here's number 10. This is the government. Now, Europe. Let's talk about Europe. Everyone gets very, very excited about Europe. Europe is superior to the UK insofar as we allow it to be. In 1972, the government, Parliament, I'm getting into the same, making the same mistake that you shouldn't make. Parliament passed the European Communities Act, and that said that for the sake of argument, we are now playing the European game, and we have to submit ourselves to the wider context of European legislation and laws. So now, anything that the British government wants to do has to be consistent with the wider dictates of Europe. So, it is kind of complicated. I'm not going to pretend it's not. But the fact of the matter is, policy is now restricted in that we can only operate within the terms of the European game. Our law now has to comply with European law. Our policy has to be consistent with European policy. And of course, areas such as workplace legislation and immigration legislation, all of that is an area in which we have surrendered our policy sovereignty and indeed our legal sovereignty to be part of the wider European game. Now, if we decided to get rid of this particular act, as many in the Conservative Party and certainly UKIP would like, then bang, that law no longer exists. And if that law no longer exists, then we are no longer bound by the dictates of Europe. That way, we have essentially maintained our sovereignty. What we've done is we've voluntarily submitted or surrendered our sovereignty while we're part of this wider European game. This is a complicated idea, and I will make sure that I explain it, hopefully a little bit better than this, in class. There's another type of abrogation of sovereignty that we might want to look at, and this one flows the other way. And this is to do with devolution. Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, each of these guys now have their own assemblies, and they have a degree of authority over that particular region. So, for example, in 2004, Scotland banned hunting with dogs. Sorry, that was in 2002. In 2006, Scotland banned smoking in public places ahead of England. But of course, the big area that you know about, presumably, is tuition fees. Because in Scotland, students don't pay tuition fees. Now, that was not a decision that came out of Westminster. No, that was a decision that came out of Edinburgh. And so we have a sense in which the UK government has surrendered certain aspects of policy sovereignty to the regions. However, the key thing here is thinking about this. This is described by statute law. And of course, whatever Parliament giveth, Parliament can taketh away. And if we take those away, then the authority of the regions dissolves and the sovereignty, the policy sovereignty of the central government is maintained. Complicated again, and I look forward to explaining it in more detail in class. What you need to grasp for the time being is that the political sovereigns in the UK are the people. They are the source of all political power. Legal sovereignty resides with Parliament. That is the source of all legal power. And practical executive works. You need to correct these notes. Policy sovereignty resides with the government. That is the highest decision-making body in the state. We can look at it this way. The people are the political sovereigns. We grant authority, legal authority, to Parliament to operate on our behalf. And Parliament needs somebody to guide it, to make the sort of executive decisions. And so we have policy sovereignty, and we grant that to number 10, to the government. This is all very, very complicated, and I look forward to answering questions that come up in class. So try to process that, come through with your questions, and I look forward to answering them as soon as I possibly can.